Greetings in Christ, everybody, and welcome to Catholicism and Culture. I am Steve Greene, Director of Holy Family Institute of Catholic Faith and Life. Today we're talking about the question, what does it mean to be human? And the paradigm that I'm going to use for framing and then considering that question, I'm going to borrow from Aristotle. But beginning with Socrates, you may remember, of course, Socrates' famous observation that the unexamined life is not worth living. And what Socrates means by that is, for a creature such as ourselves, the only creature in the visible world endowed with rational intelligence, the gift of reason, it's impossible to live a fully and authentically human life if we never use that power, that capacity, our rational intelligence, the gift of reason, to contemplate the meaning and the purpose of a human life, to contemplate, in fact, what it means to be human. And so Aristotle, who of course is the star pupil of Plato, himself Socrates' star pupil, is an intellectual descendant of Socrates and agrees strongly that for a human person, in order for us to be authentically human, in order for us to live an authentically human life, we have to at some point contemplate our own existence. We have to ask ourselves what it means to be human, what our life is for. And so Aristotle, in thinking about that question, in seeking himself to examine his own human life, his own human nature, he framed it in four questions, kind of the four fundamental human questions, if you will. Now, there have been many other thinkers over the ages, over the centuries, who have come up with different numbers of questions, nuanced it in other ways. But I think these four fundamental human questions that Aristotle gives us are a handy framework by which to begin contemplating the answer to that question, what does it mean to be human? So what I want to do is I want to just set up the four fundamental human questions, and then I want to continue what I began in the previous video. I want to continue comparing and contrasting the, again, broadly speaking, Judeo-Christian or Greco-Christian anthropology, the Judeo or Greco-Christian understanding of the human person, and contrasting that with our modern/postmodern view of the human person. So I want to do the four questions and answer those four questions from within those two very different worldviews with, as we talked about in the previous video, two fundamentally incompatible ideas about what the ultimate reality is, what the fundamental reality is, what the reality behind everything we experience and observe in the universe is. To just sum up again, if you haven't watched that video yet, the question was, what is the ultimate or fundamental reality for the Judeo-Christian or Greco-Christian philosophical worldview? Broadly speaking, I just use the term the classical worldview, covering kind of all three of those rich traditions, the Christian tradition, the Jewish tradition, and the Greek tradition. The classical worldview has always been that the ultimate reality, which explains and lies behind everything we experience and observe, is God. Now, obviously with differences between the Judaic understanding of God, the Christian understanding of God as a Trinity, and then the Greek understanding of God for Plato, the divine craftsman, for Aristotle, the unmoved mover or the uncaused cause. Nonetheless, their conclusion was that there was a divine mind responsible ultimately for everything that we experience and observe. Now, fast forward to our own day, in the wake of the modernist project, and now living in the postmodernist, although some thinkers today would argue that we're actually in the postmodernist. Someone's eventually going to have to come up with a better title for this. We're going to be in the post-modernist era. But at any rate, in the wake of the modernist project, which was, to oversimplify it a bit, essentially an attempt to reconstruct the universe and man with no meaningful reference to God. In the wake of that project, materialism, by which I mean the view that everything is ultimately reducible, therefore explainable, simply by matter and motion. So the ultimate or fundamental reality for the materialist and this is, of course, kind of the default setting in our culture, is matter itself. So matter is what explains everything that we experience and observe. Here are the four fundamental human questions, according to Aristotle. First is the question of identity. Who am I? Second is the question of origin. Where do I come from? Third is the question of purpose or meaning. What am I for? And then finally, the question of destiny. Where am I going? So if you think of a human life, those four questions frame nicely the most important things to examine, to consider, to contemplate, to ponder about ourselves. Who am I? Where do I come from? What am I for? And where am I going? Okay. So I want to begin actually with the materialist worldview. So if it's true, what the materialists say, that everything, and they mean everything which we experience and observe in the universe, whether outside ourselves or inside ourselves, everything is ultimately just matter in motion. There is nothing metaphysical. Meta, just Greek word meaning above or beyond, and physical, of course, referring to physical or material. So there's nothing above or beyond the physical. The physical is all that exists. The material is all that exists. First question, what am I? Well, ultimately, you are just that. You are just matter in motion. Thomas Hobbes, one of the fathers of modern philosophy, came to that conclusion. He said everything is reducible to matter in motion. In other words, what a human person is a buzzing cloud of atoms, a random, unintended, accidental, and temporary configuration of matter, which for a very brief time in the context of cosmic history, takes this particular form with these particular capacities and functions, and then, of course, shortly thereafter will disintegrate physically and cease to be. More on that when we talk about our destiny, if materialism is true. But what this means then is that there's nothing that can accurately be said of a human person that cannot just as accurately be said of any of the other clumps of matter that the universe has just thrown together. So matter, of course, tumbles down to the present moment through the void of time and space, being shoved along by the inexorable laws of physics and evolution, and combines oh so briefly in what I call me, although the question of what I or the self means is a problematic question for materialists and something we'll take up in another video. But if I'm to accept the materialist worldview in conclusion, then I'm forced to say that I am just another clump of stuff, another clump of matter, another buzzing cloud of atoms. And I am no different fundamentally, essentially, than any other clump of atoms, than a piano or a star or an amoeba or a molecule or some chemical element. We're all the same in terms of what we are. So then to the second human question, where do I come from? The question of origin. If the materialists are correct, then I, like every other clump of stuff, every other random configuration of atoms and matter, I come from the Big Bang. My origin is the beginning of the universe. And of course, given the constants, the multitude of physical constants that govern the combining and recombining of matter over the eons and billions of years of time since the Big Bang, and given the weight, the mass, the temperature, the velocity that are all part of the Big Bang, it was inevitable that, 13.8 billion years on or so from that one originating event, it was predetermined that matter would be shoved together in this particular, although very temporary, configuration. So I come from the Big Bang. This also means, though, that I just happened. I am an accident of the combining and recombining of matter and elements over the eons. I just happened. I wasn't planned or foreseen or intended. When I came into existence, whatever it is that I really am, the universe didn't notice. The universe doesn't care. And as a corollary, when I all too soon go out of existence again, the universe again will not notice, and doesn't care. So then, given all that, the third human question, what am I for? The question of purpose. If it's true that I am a random outcome of blind physical and evolutionary forces shoving matter through the void of time and space for 13 some odd billion years, and that I come from the Big Bang, and it was predetermined, though unforeseen and unintended, that I would come to be because of the inexorable laws of physics and evolution, then the question of what I'm for is ultimately a meaningless question. It's ultimately a futile question because I'm an accident, and accidents don't mean anything. Accidents don't have a purpose. Accidents just happen. I just happened. There was no intentionality. There was no reason for my being here. If I had not been here, it would have made no difference to the universe other than the material element that constitutes me would have been available for the brief space that I'm around to combine with other material elements. And so what we're left with then in trying to examine our lives and trying to think about what it means to be human on the materialist calculation, when we get to this question of purpose, we're really kind of up the creek without a paddle. We're stuck. We don't have any purpose, not really. We don't have any meaning, not really. We're not for anything, not really. So I guess what we're left with is to try, as best we're able, to construct sort of the project of me, if you will. It falls to me to try to, in a sense, pull myself up by my own bootstraps where meaning or purpose for my very brief existence is concerned. I need to try to construct some purpose for my life. I need to gin up some meaning for my existence. I need to find something that gives my existence meaning, that gives my life purpose. And of course, given the reality of how very, very little in my own existence I have any control over, I certainly had no control, as the existentialists point out, over my coming to be. I don't exist by my own say-so. I just got dumped into existence. And when forces beyond my control damage the project of me, when tragedy strikes, when things fail, when my plan doesn't work out, when I run into obstacles I'm incapable of overcoming, or when other people do things intentionally that undermine my happiness, my well-being, my progress in this self-generated project of me, it erases the meaning, the purpose. I'm left struggling with a meaningless, purposeless existence. And the question of, do I start all over again? Do I try to rebuild the shattered project of me? Or do I just realize, make my peace with the fact that there is no meaning, there is no purpose? Or if I can't make my peace with that fact, do I just take control over one of the very few things I can control and end this life? This is a real serious question. And again, the term existential crisis refers to the crisis we encounter if we conceive ourselves to be ultimately meaningless, purposeless accidents, unintended, unknown, unwanted, unwilled, who have run into some kind of disaster or obstacle. All right, to the last question then, where am I going? The reality on the materialist conception of things is you are headed for extinction at death. Death means disintegration. The same physical forces that shoved you, because you're just matter in motion, that shoved you together will soon enough, and even now, you get to be my age, I'm 51, even now are beginning to take you apart. You are beginning to disintegrate physically, and all you are is physical. And so death is extinction. Another sad reality for the materialist is, of course, then that means that death brings to the same end the best and worst of lives. Adolf Hitler dies and simply ceases to be. Death is annihilation. Death is eternal non-existence. Adolf Hitler gets the same fate ultimately then as someone heroic like Nelson Mandela or Mother Teresa. Seems an awfully depressing reality to have to confront, but there again, if we're being consistent as materialists, that's where we're all going, extinction at death. Okay, let me just compare and contrast that very briefly with the Judeo-Christian understanding of the human person. How would I answer those same four questions from within the Catholic worldview and the Catholic anthropology? So first of all, who am I? We are all of us and each of us, a beloved son or daughter of God. We have been loved into existence, willed into existence, intended from all eternity. Before the universe existed, God knew each of us, desired that we exist, and at the moment of our conception, brought us into being, spoke our name across the ages, and gave us life, gave us existence. We are each unique and unrepeatable, possessed of inestimable worth, inviolable dignity. And no matter how we stand in relation to our fellow man, it may be that no person, no human being wants us. Sadly, this is the case for many of the unborn. They're conceived in circumstances where their biological parents do not intend or want this new human person to come into existence. But as Catholics, we understand that doesn't matter. Not ultimately, because if we exist, it's because God has willed us to exist. Mysteriously, even in far less than ideal circumstances surrounding the conception, which means that every human person is wanted. Every person is intended. There are no superfluous or accidental persons. So I am a beloved son or daughter of God. I have been created in his image and likeness. I've been willed and intended to exist. Where do I come from? I come from a free and original act of God's creative will. I come from a decision in the divine mind, a decision to bring me into existence. And I exist for my own sake. So I come from, at the moment of my conception, my parents contribute the biological material needed for a new human person, sperm from dad, egg from mom. But God creates in union with the sperm and egg. As they join at the moment of conception, he creates a new immortal spiritual soul, breathes again as he breathed his own spirit, his own divine life into the first man. He breathes again his own divine life into each new human person at the moment of their conception. Small wonder then, of course, that the Catholic Church defends the right to life of all the unborn, regardless of the circumstances under which they're conceived. But this means that I originate in a free and original act of the divine will, of divine creation. He creates each of us individually. What am I for? For a Catholic, of course, we think of this question under the heading of vocation. Vocation from the Latin vocare, or to call. So we have been called into existence intentionally by God, created by God for a purpose, with a reason. There is something entrusted to us, a role to play in the great drama of history and salvation, the church, the kingdom of God. And that unique role that is given to us is something that we've been uniquely graced and gifted for by God. And so every human life has purpose, even the most downtrodden, the most marginalized, the most forgotten, the most overlooked, the most persecuted. This is at the beating heart of the church's call to justice on behalf of our fellow man, to fight to build sane, just, and virtuous human communities that uphold and protect and defend and proclaim the dignity of every human person and the flourishing, the true human good of the whole human community. Because we each have a purpose. Each of us is irreplaceable, unique and unrepeatable, and trusted with this mission, this role to play. And so then the work of a human life in our Catholic understanding is to ask that question, is to pursue an answer to that question. What am I for? And of course, we believe as Catholics that that a question is addressed first to God, even before it's addressed to myself. Even before I ask myself, what do I think my life is about? I ask God, why did you create me? What are you calling me to? What is my vocation? What is my calling? What's the purpose or the meaning that you intend? And to find that purpose, to find that vocation, of course, is to find fulfillment, is to find happiness, to find joy, to find peace. Not perfection, not that we'll never suffer or have setbacks or challenges or trials. Of course, we will. But in the context of having found what we're called to do, those are all things that we can survive and even learn and grow from. And then finally, where am I going? Of course, for a Catholic, we all have an eternal destiny. Death is not the end. Death is a transition. Death is a doorway. We pass through the doorway of death from this life into the life to come. We step outside of space and time and into eternity. And we're all destined to spend eternity either in union with God or apart from Him. And where we will spend eternity is, of course, determined by the use we made of the life that was entrusted to us and the gift of free will, how we chose. And ultimately, all of our choices boil down to a fundamental choice either for God or against God. Either choosing, even if we're not aware of this being what we're choosing, to spend eternity with God, to be united to God, or choosing to reject God, choosing to spend eternity without God. And of course, the great secret that Catholics know is to embrace the life of grace in us, to embrace the fact that we are created for union with God ultimately, that this is the destiny that awaits every human person who will accept it. This is the ultimate reason that we're created, is to spend eternity in union with God Himself, with the Blessed Trinity. To embrace that and to strive to live with that in mind is to gain not only God, but our truest and best selves and union with all the blessed, with our loved ones who have gone before us as well. To reject it is to choose complete isolation, eternal isolation, isolation on an order and with a permanence that was inconceivable. It should horrify us to even think of it. I'm a guy who likes solitude. I'm a guy who likes alone time. I'm an introvert. I enjoy just time to be in my own head with my own thoughts. It's horrifying to imagine eternity with nothing but myself. So this is the great question of destiny. So if you compare and contrast those two, if you recognize that we live in a culture which largely unconsciously, it's not like a lot of people carefully and systematically think through these fundamental human questions, comparing the classical Judeo and Greco-Christian worldview versus the contemporary modernist or postmodernist materialist worldview. Even just the little quick glance at this that we've taken in these couple of videos is actually far more thought than most people give these questions. But you can begin to see that a culture which has unwittingly and unconsciously imbibed the materialist worldview, has accepted that as a default with all of its logical inconsistencies and with all of its problematic implications, would necessarily be a culture of despair, would necessarily be a culture of loneliness, of isolation, of hopelessness, of depression, would necessarily be a culture of use and manipulation as people claw over one another, use and manipulate one another, step on one another to try to just move the needle, to try to grasp some pleasure, some meaning, some power, any one of the fleeting things that can seem, although this is an illusion, to give purpose or meaning to our life, if even for a moment. And you contrast that with the profoundly beautiful view of the human person as unique and unrepeatable, as infinitely precious to the divine, to the God who made us, who willed us to exist, and who has made us to be in union with Him. Here we hear that great echoing reflection of St. Augustine where he says, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in Thee." We live in a culture with a restless heart, constantly pursuing fleeting and illusory pleasures, fleeting and illusory power, fleeting and illusory substitutes for true meaning and true purpose, to try to fill that God-shaped hole in every human heart, to try to fill that aching void which nothing but our Creator can fill. And so that's worth contemplating. It's worth thinking about. It's worth reflecting on. So there you have it, the 4 fundamental human questions from the Judeo-Christian, Greco-Christian, classical anthropology and worldview versus the modern, postmodern, materialist worldview. I hope you enjoyed it. Well, like I said, we'll take up all these questions again in subsequent videos, but hope that's food for thought. As always, please subscribe to our channel, like the video. That obviously helps us out on YouTube, and please share it. Feel free to post it on social media, send the link to folks that you think would enjoy watching these videos. And thanks for being part of the Holy Family Institute of Catholic Faith and Life and our ongoing project. Remember, the church has what the world needs, so learn your faith, live your faith, and share your faith.